To begin with, I would like to make a few preliminary remarks. I have added some resources for further consultation. This includes a reading list with some source material and a few further questions to work on. As a caveat, I would like to remark that I am heavily indebted to the work of Helmut Kreutz, and I am also his publisher of the German version of The Money Syndrome. In this talk, I will present his charts that have been updated by me until the latest date possible. This talk has three main themes. In the first part, I will talk about the accumulation of monetary wealth. The second part consists of interest rates and inequality. In the third part, I would like to outline a few central trends regarding money. These are linked to the first two parts of this talk. A lot of stuff for 30 minutes. That is why the talk about the trends I see is placed as an optional talk at the end to be viewed if you are interested. Some of the themes I have covered in the workshop last year, which can be retrieved online. I would like to present some new data and outline a few things that have changed since then. The first one is that raw empirical data matters. I have been made painfully aware of this truism during the last few months as governments all over the world try to cover up their failures regarding their handling and presentation of data regarding COVID. Helmut Kreutz stands out in this regard as his emphasis was always empirical. Sometimes data isn't available at all, which is another problem entirely. The second point is that economics is, to a certain extent, political arithmetics. In his entertaining and illuminating book, 23 Things They Don't Tell You About Capitalism, the economist Ha-Joon Chang says, economics is politics. This is a pretty radical statement, and I don't agree completely, as economics has developed its own methodology and stands its ground in the scientific arena. However, some points are worth thinking about. Some questions. Who is funding the person collecting the data? If it is a government entity, why is this specific entity collecting the data? What are they not collecting? Everywhere in the world, the role of state entities to collect data is shrinking. Think tanks all over the world are pursuing their own goals, and successful enterprises ground their decision-making in hard data, and therefore collect them too. Third-party funding is becoming ever more relevant in academic life, but some people give good arguments that this is restricting the freedom of research. In his book, Die Macht der einen Zahl, which can be roughly translated as the power of the one number, Philip Lepanese outlines the history of how gross domestic product became established as one of the main economic parameters. It is a striking reminder that it is sometimes worthwhile to have a closer look at concepts that are deeply entrenched in our thinking. GDP is of course only loosely connected to what I'm talking about today. The first part of this talk is about the accumulation of monetary wealth. In this chart, Helmut Kreutz depicted the amount of monetary assets and debt for Germany. The chart has many sides to it. A few simple things first that are easy to understand. The first thing is that the wealth isn't depicted in absolute values, but in percentage of GDP, a term wrought with problems of another sort, but of some use in this context. The second thing, and this is the main takeaway, is that wealth and debt develop in a parallel manner. The third thing to take away is that wealth and debt are distributed among different economic sectors. Let's look at 5 of them. The first group is the state and all the institutions that belong to it. It is depicted here in the chart in yellow. The second group, roughly, consists of companies, financial companies excluded here. The third group consists of private households. Every one of you belongs to a household in one way or another. The fourth group consists of organizations without an aim to make a profit. The growing sector of NGOs belongs here, but also big parties like the churches or even political parties. The fifth group, abroad, may seem a little bit odd. It is depicted here in brown. Viewed from a national perspective, every nation is differently invested in other countries. Think of 2 extremes. A national economy protected from other economies to 100%, and a national economy that de facto belongs to different shareholders to 100%. From a macroeconomic perspective, it is possible to quantify these sectors, and again, this is the third point to take away. Wealth and debt are distributed unevenly between the sectors. Let's have a look at the groups. The first thing noticeable is that private households possess the largest piece of the pie. This is not really surprising. It is obvious that the wealth of an economy somehow gets to the people in the end. If you are politically left-wing as I am, this may also strike you as somewhat odd. A multinational corporation like Microsoft or Amazon is an institutional entity in its own regard, but still it belongs to somebody. Then, if we have a look at the companies, it is relevant to notice that the companies are net debtors. This is also not surprising. Companies are regularly in debt, most of the time in the beginning, and after big investments anyway. If you are invested in a company, their debt is your wealth. By giving them a credit, you will contract a legal claim for them to pay you back. All industrialized states are in debt now. And here again it is necessary to note that someone is legally obliged to receive payback. Germany is a striking example here. And we'll have to have a look at the European Central Bank a little later. Even if you take into account the assets of the state, here depicted in yellow again, the German state is still heavily in debt. One striking trend here is that NGOs are on the rise. They are only a small group in all the sectors, but they have net wealth and nearly no debt. The political connection is obvious. Increasing wealth means increasing influence. The second trend is visible when we have a look at the sector abroad. By viewing this sector, it is apparent that over the past few years, Germany has become a net creditor for the rest of the world. This means that wealth is accumulating in Germany. The net plus was 2 trillion euros at the end of 2020. It is also possible to have a look at this chart from a chronological perspective. After the Second World War, the sectors household, companies, and the state had about a third of the share of wealth. This wealth was, of course, much smaller than the GDP as the economy was destructed. This is now entirely different. If we have a look at the absolute values, we can also see that the economy has grown considerably. 100% GDP is depicted here as the black line. After the Second World War, wealth accumulated to about 57% of the gross domestic product at the time. Now, wealth accumulates to about 5.6 times the gross domestic product. Quite a staggering increase. I have only gotten my hands on numbers for 2020 a few days ago. I hope at the time you listen to this talk, I am able to provide you with a newer chart that also contains the newest figures. The genius of Helmut Kreutz was that he was able to depict these complex interrelationships in a chart that fits on an A4 sheet of paper. However, I would like to point out a few technical limitations. Wealth is described here by a definition of the German Bundesbank and comprises assets such as shares, but also gold. Both are, strictly speaking, not monetary assets. But as master of raw data, you often become master of definitions. Another limitation is, for example, if you are a freelancer, you don't have a company. The money you earn lands into the sector private household. Another important methodological detail that can't be placed in this chart, but is necessary to know. A third limitation. Companies also own other companies, even NGOs, due to their shares. Maybe you can pause the video now and go through the data depicted in the chart. It is not easy to grasp all the facts in 10 minutes. The second part of this talk is about inequality and interest rates. There are quite a few factors that influence the wealth distribution. Helmut Kreutz, however, focused on interest as one of the main drivers. I'll give you some charts that contain figures that have been updated until 2019. The below chart also includes Austria. Sadly, the reports on interest rates by banks on 2020 will only come out in September 2021. Too late for our talk. The source material, however, is linked in the resources document. If we have a look at these figures, we can see a few striking developments in the last few years. The blue line depicts interest rates and the amount of money that banks have earned. The white lines depict the interest rates paid to people. If you subtract the amounts paid to people from the interest earned, you get the bank margin, which is depicted here as the black line. If we look at 2 years, 2008 and 2019, you can see a striking difference. In Germany, banks have earned 433 billion euros in interest rates and paid out 342 billion. This amount has shrunk to 162.8 billion in 2019 and interest payments paid to 80.3 billion. A serious reduction. The reduction in Austria is even bigger. We have a payments amounting to 37.6 billion in 2008 that have shrunk to 6.5 billion in 2019, which is only a fragment. The amount 433 billion in 2008 is the amount of interest that people all over Germany had to pay to German banks, and the 342 billion is the figure that people have received through interest rates. Together, these two figures point to a central driver in economic inequality, because someone had to pay the interest rates and someone received them. It is also useful to have a look at another relationship. We read in the news that negative interest rates drive banks to destruction. This statement is not really substantiated by the figures we receive on interest rates. As you can see, the amounts paid and amounts earned are developing in a parallel manner. As you can also see from this chart, the bank margin isn't too heavily affected by the different interest rates. If we have a look at the year 2008 again, the bank margin equals to about roughly 90 billion, just slightly lower than it is in 2019. Of course, the banks had a slight loss, but it can't be entirely explained by the sinking interest rates. It is useful to put these figures into proportion, as commercial banks often complain about central banking policy and state that their balance sheet has been ruined by negative interest rates. This is not entirely true. Counting monetary assets is a tricky endeavour enough, but assessing how it is distributed among the people is another issue entirely. A problem we encounter is that government entities and research institutions don't know the exact distribution of wealth among its citizens. There are many reasons for this. One is that it doesn't garner that much interest in research. Another problem is that there are not many taxes issued on wealth, and the government is cagey about releasing any information they have. It is not restricted to monetary assets either. For example, in Germany, it is not possible to find out who owns the land. Another problem is that rich people don't like being scrutinized by researchers regarding their wealth, which is understandable. There are two solutions to this. One is the Gini index, and the others are surveys that have a look at income and wealth. A shorthand to assess inequality of wealth is the Gini coefficient or Gini index. Roughly, a Gini index describes in one number the inequality in a district. A Gini index of 0 means that wealth is distributed completely equally among all citizens. A Gini index of 1 would mean that one person owns everything and the rest own nothing. The Gini index was estimated by the EU Household and Consumption Survey, which was conducted between 2008 and 2011 in different European countries. It was estimated to be about 0.76 or 0.77 in Germany and Austria, respectively. This is a quite high number. However, the Gini coefficient lacks detail and is only a shorthand. It doesn't say anything about the quality of wealth distributed. To make an extreme example, the richest and the poorest country in the world could have the same Gini coefficient. If we look at this map, we can see that two South African countries and Germany have roughly the same Gini coefficient. But of course, their economies are completely different. The Gini index also lacks in another regard. We don't learn much about the exact distribution among individual households. A country may be more unequal or less unequal than the other, but we don't learn how this affects the single household. The best estimate on wealth distribution is assessing the various surveys conducted and hope that they give a fair representation of the distribution. Spoiler alert, they aim at doing so, and it is very valuable to have a look at what they're doing, but only because there isn't anything better. There are 3 problems. The first problem is that the sample sizes are a little bit small. The second problem is that some groups, especially the very poor and the super rich, are not included in the group. This can be partly explained by the third problem. Participation is voluntary. I will give you one piece of information that will clear up what I mean. The Einkommens- und Verbrauchsstichprobe, which can be roughly translated as Income and Consumption Survey, contains about 50,000 households, which is quite a large study group. It is conducted by the government. However, they exclude everyone earning more than 18,000 euros a month. I couldn't believe this, but I took part in the 2018 survey myself. It is written in their reference document, and I got confirmation from somebody working with the statistical agency in Germany. Other research groups, such as the Private Household and Finance Survey and the Socio-Economic Panel, face the same problem. The super wealthy have no incentive in taking part in these surveys. I will state an extreme example to make a point. What would a multi-billionaire gain from opening up to a research survey? I stress this point because this is something different than excluding people regarding age, weight, height, or intelligence. These factors follow a normal Gaussian distribution. Somebody who is extremely old or tall will never be such an outlier that he or she is 1,000,000 times older or taller than the rest of the group. With wealth, this can easily be the case though. Sky's the limit. Wealth follows an inverted Pareto distribution. What Helmut Kreutz did is guessing the exact distribution by taking the yearly interest rates we have looked at before and have a close look at the income and wealth distribution surveys. He did this for many years, and I have updated the chart for 2013 here on the right side. This is where one of the genius traits of Helmut Kreutz's economic work lies, in my view, and this is not acknowledged very much as he is not cited in economic circles. Let's have a short look at what he did. Helmut Kreutz grouped the 10 households by income. The left group, number 1, is the household with the lowest income, and the right group, number 10, is the household with the highest income. The grey bars depict consumption expenses. These are, for the poorest household, much lower than for the richest household. From these expenses, Helmut Kreutz estimated the probable amount of interest payment that is contained in the prices. This is depicted by the black bars. The white bars depict the estimated interest income every household has. And here we can see a striking difference. Because the richest household have the largest wealth, their interest income is the highest and is able to compensate the interest payments in consumption. Only the groups 9 and 10 are winners of the interest game. All other 8 households lose, even though households 5 to 8 also have a certain amount of interest income, but it is not enough to compensate for the interest expenses they have in prices. Another striking fact is that the first 4 household groups don't have any interest income because they don't have any wealth. I tried to update his chart for 2013. The overall income has increased slightly, but because interest rates have shrunk, the interest earned by the 10th household is also much lower, although it is still a net winner. The newest survey is conducted by the DIV in Berlin. Different from the other 2 surveys, it focuses on private persons and not on households. This is a fairly new survey because it first comprised the super rich. This gives you an estimate of what the other surveys have been lacking for years. The conservative estimate was that the first 1% of rich people owned 21.6% of all the wealth. After correcting this and including some rich people, the DIV corrected this number to 35.3%. Including very wealthy people affects the table considerably. The old estimate was that the richest 0.1% of people had 4 million in wealth. This figure was corrected to 5.5 million or 5.6 million, a staggering increase. The people at percentile 50 remain about roughly the same. The survey also found out that the first quarter of people has virtually no wealth. The first 5% are even in debt. The material I presented to you on interest rates is, as you can see, not that much different from last year. The conclusion remains the same. The larger the interest rates, the bigger flow to richer households. Maybe it is most easy to state the magnitude of interest flow by putting it next to other figures that have been published regarding other themes. I have picked 4 figures. For example, the money missing from Wirecard is estimated at 1.9 billion. Paying for 108 Eurofighters until 2013, estimated at 14.5 billion. The education and science expenses in Germany for 2020 amounted to 28.6 billion, and the fiscal damage caused by the Cum-Ex scandal at 55 billion. I could have picked many other figures from other areas, but because they have received some attention in media and come from diverse fields, they seem suitable to compare them with the whopping 80 billion that have flown due to interest rates. The question of proportion arises immediately. The themes of the third part, as I have said in the beginning, will be discussed in the optional video.